Hello and welcome to episode 398 of the Win in Six podcast, proudly a part of the Eurostep podcast network and the Blue Wire podcast family. I'm your host, Adam McGee, and joining me as always is my good friend, my co-host, Jordan Treske. Jordan, hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Doing well. Doing very, very well.
It's been an interesting time lately for the Bucks, and we are gonna talk through all of it. First and foremost, apologies. We didn't have an episode last week. That was not the plan. I ended up sick, and then in solidarity, I think essentially Jordan also got sick right around the time. So there wasn't even a chance of a one man or a GSPN combination, but we are back. Normal service resumed. And we're here to talk about the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, Adrian Griffin, because it seems like no one else is doing it, Jordan. There hasn't been a whole lot of chatter
I
out in the
just
world.
I really, I don't think anybody's talking about it. That's part of what we talk about, the things that no one's talking about. And it's about time that we shine a light on those issues and where things stand. You know what I mean? I also appreciate anybody listening to this because, if you don't have a Bucks credential, you can't say things about the team. Sorry.
Yeah, we're not necessarily going to get into all of that stuff for people who got that reference. We'll leave that parked in the past, Mr. Treske. But we are going to talk about the ongoing mania that is surrounding, what are we at now? 12 games, 11 games, 11 games.
11 games.
The first 11 games of Adrian Griffin's tenure. Not a lot, Jordan. We haven't got to, I don't know, we're between what, about 12, 13%, somewhere around that. Not even, right? So listen, we don't need to run the numbers. We're barely into the season, and I think because as we knew in the offseason, as we talked about, it's at least the most significant hire in the history of the franchise since the last time they hired a head coach. It was going to be the thing we were going to find ourselves talking about all season. But it has brought up what I feel like are still unparalleled levels of angst among Bucks fans. Honestly, I don't feel like I've ever seen an NBA fan base react like this either so soon into a coach's tenure. I don't know if you've got anything you can think about that, but it really
On a
does
non
feel.
like Lakers kind of heatles, especially, like those are very like that's an event. It Watching Bucks games this year and as long as Giannis and Lillard are on the team are events. But it was not the level of like the big three in Miami, the heat index covering the Heatles,
Yeah.
that
And
level of thing.
even that was because, situation kind of inherited. Those guys just were there. And then it's like, are you cut out for this? Are you capable of managing all of this? In terms of team that was already good, but maybe not quite as good as everyone wanted them to be, as many thought they should be, for a new head coach to come in. It feels pretty unique. Um, and I think it's worth talking about that. It's worth talking about why so many people are digging their heels in to everything is great and this is all going to pay off. And I can see it already. And then people on the other side who are just like, no, it's done. This team is done. They need to fire him now. We need to get out ahead of this. What are we doing? Look at all the signs. We could talk through what we actually think on the various bits and pieces, because I think it's fair to say there are plenty of good, valid points to be made on both sides of those arguments. And I think, like, I understand everyone is going to be leaning one way or another. I personally lean one way on it. Like Jordan leans another way. I think we actually probably lean in opposite directions right now. But it's also 11 games, and I don't really feel like we've seen anywhere near enough to make any kind of definitive judgment. And it's wild just how far along the road I think the conversation is on this for a lot of people, are how quick to make snap judgments. Let's start with why do you think that is?
Oh, I think in part because of what we had seen for 5 years under Mike Budenholzer. And we talked about it extensively at the time of post Heat series fallout on the event of his firing, a couple of weeks after that, on the event of Adrian Griffin getting hired. It's the elephant in the room because literally you could every single thing that the Bucks accomplished in regular seasons the last 5 years were overwhelmingly positive. Even the post-championship year, which they were without Brooke Lopez for the majority of it, they were fighting injuries, there was COVID, all these different things. You can look at all these positive metrics, numbers to support just how overwhelmingly great the Bucks were. And therefore, what you see or what you saw in the past is this yardstick of this is how contending teams should always be. You may not win it every year, but you look at these, encouraging evidence, facts, whatever, to support your case that the Bucks at least have a shot. And the irony in all this, and it's kind of going further away from my point, but like from what I've seen over the last, increasingly this week, I didn't really see it until this week, I should say. And I'm not as active on Twitter anymore just because I have a life, I have a job, I have all these different things. I'm not covering the team like I was before.
That's a good thing. I've seen
It's a
plenty of
very good
evidence
thing.
on Twitter this week to suggest having a life is a good thing, not having a life is a bad thing.
I would suggest having a life and things that separate you from sports and your favorite sports teams because it just helps. Anyway, I do think. What was my point? What was my point?
You were talking
the
about
irony,
what you're starting to see this week.
the irony in how these 11 games that Adrian Griffin has coached, and there's good to be weighed through it, there's bad to be weighed through it, there's things that are entirely separate from how he's doing as a coach that he has to live with because of where the roster is at right now and what they're trying to do this year, is that Mike Budenholzer, for all the good that he did in small sample sizes, aka playoff series, more often than not, fell on his face in these great, collapses. As much as I love Mike Budenholzer and will always respect what he did for this team, what he did for the city, and yada yada yada. The whole reason why he's no longer the coach is because of that very same thing. And I find it very ironic to judge games that happen now with it's not the same team that we talked about before, and there's a lot of other things that we'll get into over the course of this conversation, but I just think we can't get out of this small sample size of judging coaches and then projecting, this is what it's going to be like in April, May, and June, because I truly do not understand how anything that we have seen so far is a good projection of what we will see later on, because I think things evolve in a much different way than in years past, or for a lot of reasons. But that's getting ahead of my point.
I don't entirely agree with you. I obviously agree with the central point of this is all ridiculous and this is way too soon. And
Yes.
there's a level of patience required here that you're not going to learn anything. I mean, because the flip side of this is, let's say in a scenario where the Bucks were to decide, God, we don't like how this looks. It's not going well. We had the Terry Stotts thing. We have these, these dark clouds, this mysterious sense of, the vibes aren't great. The product on the court doesn't look that great. We've now got Damian Lillard. We're better than ever. We can't afford to waste time. We're going to fire the guy. Adrian Griffin, you're gone. And then he goes and picks up another job, and he very quickly starts to look very good. And the Bucks have another coach, and it's not quite going how they wanted. And everyone's forever then like, God, they couldn't even stick to their own convictions. Like there's just no path to that. You've got to give it some length of time. Now, what I would say is I think you're getting at something that I'm very much feeling in what everyone's talking about, which is for all of Mike Budenholzer's flaws and failings, he certainly knew how to start seasons strong, and he beyond that, he knew how to start his coaching tenure with the Bucks strong.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the spoken, unspoken, people who like Bud, people who hate Bud. That is the yardstick that is there for Adrian Griffin. It's like we spent a lot of the offseason warning. I say a lot of the offseason. You and I mostly sat out the offseason. But when we came back, it's the thing that we set up leading into it was this is not going to look great. It could be pretty ugly. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
I still think it's easier for people to hear that than it is to accept that because there is this idea of, well, it's not like a coach can't come in and immediately make, this transformative impact and everything looks great. The problem with that is, for as much as everyone wants to like rag on Bud now, it's the difference between the way the Bucks were failing last year versus the way the Bucks were failing in like 2015, 16, 2016, 17, that kind of time frame
Yeah.
is night and day. And it is not as simple as just come in and magically fix everything that was wrong, which in the grand scheme of things is not a whole massive amount of stuff, right? The Bucks do the large majority, or certainly were under Bud, the large majority of things they need to do to win very well. You add into the mix, you got Giannis talking about just like not really feeling good with his game, like just doesn't feel like himself yet, hasn't felt like it's right. Damian Lillard has been up and down in a relative sense, but in a way that's very much expected for player new surroundings, player who didn't get a normal off season to kind of build up for this. Like all of that just feels like, yeah, like this is kind of how it should be. Now, what I would say, and this is where I'd push back against what you're saying, I wouldn't frame this as the problems with Bud were he fell on his face in April, May, and June. And so the new coach is brought in to make this team a different team at that time of the season. And say that Griffin can have something akin to a free pass where it's like once he's treading water to a place where they're going to be there. Because I would get why that's the mindset we have, because that's what we've been used to, a very, very strong regular season team that falls short in the postseason. It is entirely possible they could be an underwhelming regular season team who falls short immediately in the postseason as well. And instead of being like, you know what, they just don't know how to play playoff basketball, a season could finish. It could be just like they weren't it. They weren't right. The whole thing wasn't clicking, it wasn't working. And I do think, like, in that regard, this is a different situation to coaches in the past. And I do think the pressure is much greater. The timeline, like, if it goes wrong, it could be much shorter. I still like guys gotta get to the All-Star break, before you're even getting close to that. And even at that, that's such a
In the
small
new
period of
year.
time. You've got to see things trending in a direction. We're not even in December. It's it's wild. So much of the conversation around the
We're
NBA
not
from
even a
people that are
month in.
casuals is always, the NBA doesn't start until, Christmas Day. And yet there's this talking point of, well, just how badly have the Bucks blown it? And there are things to be concerned about. There's things not to like. If you listen to the podcast, you'll have heard me say before, like, I don't think this was the right hire. I don't necessarily think it was the right choice. I haven't been overly inspired so far. Like, I also don't know all the secrets to the universe, and I'm completely, aware of the fact I could be entirely wrong, and Adrian Griffin could be the best coach in Bucks history. And I can't see anything in 11 games to be able to like sincerely puff my chest out and be like, I didn't think this was a good choice. And you know what? He sucks. It's like you can't do that. And I feel very strongly on the flip side of that too. I think there's been an element of like performatively, oh, they're grinding it out. Look at them. This is good for them. These close games. I think that's nonsense too. I don't think there's any big positive here. I don't think there's any big negative. It has been very underwhelming, but you cannot treat this as if we're getting something definitive. And I understand that's frustrating because people say, well, you can't, how much of the season can you just let go by? The reality is none of it is as simple. And these are tough decisions. It's a tough decision to fire Bud. It's a tough decision to bring in a first time head coach to replace him. Definitely a factor in this too, because when things don't start great, everyone's like, God, we haven't actually seen him do this before. What if he just can't do this at all? That could be true. It may not be true. It's just way too soon. I think there's a whole lot of baggage here, though. Like, there's endless Bucks baggage that we've kind of lived through. And even when people aren't actively talking about it, or even when people are like framing their conversation against it, when you're getting people who are like trashing Bud still on the Griffin optimist side, or you're getting people who are like on the flip side of it now hailing everything Bud did. It's like there's middle ground here, and that is really whether that's the right place to be right now. Honestly, doesn't matter. I mean, if you're a fan of the Bucks, you should not give a shit. Sorry, Ty, I've done it again. About being right. You need to care about this team getting back to the finals, winning a championship, giving themselves a chance to add to the legacy that was already built a couple of seasons ago. Like, that's what it's about. It's not about where was I on this and am I going to be proven right? And in trying to see, is this going to work for the Bucks? We haven't got enough evidence yet. Before the Raptors game, and I should have pulled it up. I know it was cited on the broadcast though. Or sorry, before the Bulls game, and then obviously the Raptors game, Giannis was injured, so didn't play it together at all. The big three, or new big three, which includes Dame, along with Giannis and Chris, only played 60 minutes together this season.
Do you know where Chris Middleton ranks in total minutes played on the Bucks?
Oh, well, he's probably sat out three games.
I think he's sat two. I believe they've had two back-to-backs.
Two back-to-backs.
Actually, I should know. He sat out 3 games. Or two games, sorry.
I'm going to say 8th or 9th.
He ranks 9th. Behind Cameron Payne and just ahead of Marjan.
You're just not seeing the Bucks yet. Like, it's that simple.
That
like the possibility again, because this is not like trying to lay out both sides. I actually just think we're in a position where everyone should be aware that both sides of this argument are like still equally on the table. We could see the big three together a lot. We could go, oh my God, it's so much worse. and then, when you get to see that, we have more grounds to have a real conversation, and the Bucks have actual evidence where you start to think about it a lot more. Now, again, I would still say we're a long way away from making a decision on this. A long way away. Like, I wouldn't even be talking like this if it wasn't something that it feels like on one way or another for 2 weeks now. This was a podcast I wanted to do a week ago, and we both got sick. And little did I know the landscape we would be having the conversation in a week later.
Become radioactive.
It's kind of wild.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can go with this. To the overall sentiment that has dominated Bucks Twitter, whatever you want to call it, Bucks X, whatever exists anymore, of fire Adrian Griffin. We've seen all we've seen. Show's over. Pull the curtain, kind of thing. And I've seen plenty of people that I respect that are not necessarily. It's not about being a believer of Adrian Griffin or a hater or all these different things that make it sound like there's this civil war of Bucks Twitter, like, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. We are independent people of one another that happens to like the same team, and people think like, yeah, you're a Bucks fan, we're automatically friends, right? It's like, no, it does not matter. I don't know you. I like the same team as you. That's a
Honestly,
common ground.
right now, I don't want to be associated with most of these people.
Yes. So I find it just super odd. And it's like, we've done this, to your point of like, there's the echoes of past coaches,
But we'll get
of
there. We'll get to it.
past subjects, of like, it just, there's this prevailing wisdom of, because Jason Kidd got fired in the way that he did, and all these people put on these avatars of fire Kidd, that'll show the organization that we're not happy with the coach, we're not happy with mediocrity of chasing what Herb Cole did, blah 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 blah, because now we have a superstar. We can't stand for this. And it's never really gone away, and it's very just vexing to me, because I think there's an not unjust, an undue amount of, well, they started doing that, and he by the end of his tenure in Milwaukee, he got booed a couple times, and therefore that's when they pulled the trigger and moved on from him. And it's like, in the reality, the owners of the team realized that, hey, we're not as good as we could be. We're going to fire Jason.
But also, to this whole point, as has been documented since, as I know we had heard at the time, the ownership were divided. We're talking about people now who all want the Bucks to win, and it's like, some think Griffin's the answer, some think he's not the answer. The same thing applied with Jason Kidd at the time, and it is just kind of a natural dynamic at play in this.
It's why you could have easily seen that happen when they hired him in the manner that they did, because of just all the circumstances that came about it, and knowing Mark Lazary and all these different things, and blah blah blah. But that overall of like, hey, they hurt us, and that's never really gone away. Had forgotten that when the Bucks won the championship and they celebrated the parade, someone brought a sign that said "Fire Coach Bud." And granted, again, we're talking about a very small amount of people. I'm talking about one person that wasted their time to make a sign at a championship parade for a team that had not won anything in 50 years, and decided, yeah, I'm going to bring that sign and wave it like an idiot. And just like, that's what I'm doing. But like, I feel like that is just the ultimate, like, oh, the coach sucks, we have to get rid of him. How do we organize it? It's the only way to really make our voices heard. And I really don't understand having that thought after 11 games, when the team right now that I'm seeing is far from complete. A lot of the same things that we have talked about the Bucks last year, certainly by the end of it, can easily apply this year. Like that, I just find it very just odd of like, why do we keep going down? This is like 5.0 of the same stupid thing, and it's a waste of our time that we keep doing this and to live the same day over and over again.
I have some theories. Which we'll go into in a second.
Yeah.
But before we do that, Jordan, we got something else we're going to do, and very much not a waste of our time. Do you want to tell the people what we want to tell them about?
Are you using a sleeper app for daily fantasy basketball? I am.
Do you think you know basketball? Then try to turn your basketball knowledge into real money with the Sleeper app, the ultimate fantasy sports app that can turn game day into payday. Just download the Sleeper app and pick more or less on your favorite players with more stats than any other daily fantasy app. Just choose 2 or more of your favorite players from pregame or live, pick more or less from the predicted stats, and you could win up to 100 times your money if your picks win.
Damian Lillard is starting to heat up from deep. It might be time, Dame time, one could even say, to start considering going higher on made threes for the Bucks superstar point guard.
Use promo code Eurostep and you'll get up to a $100 match in your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states. Check out Sleeper today. That's promo code Eurostep. GYOROSTEP. I think, Jordan, to the larger point you're making, this is something I've been thinking about actually quite a lot in terms of sports more broadly. Largely in regards to soccer for me, which is, the source of most of my work and also a lot of my, non-work entertainment. I've been thinking a lot about how sports have evolved and changed and how we talked about them has changed. And this is a conversation that has gone on for so long in NBA circles. And it usually refers back to, say, the likes of the kind of conversation discourse that ESPN have gradually fueled over time. This bemoaning of, we're not talking about the game. We're talking about all of these things that will drive clicks that are tangential to the game. Free agency, trades, Giannis Antetokounmpo's future. We're familiar with all this kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, in the past couple of weeks, the NBA commissioner himself, Adam Silver, has come out and talked about how he wants to change the way the league is discussed and what broadcasts look like so that there is more explanation of actual basketball terms and of the inner workings of the game. So the average fan, or dare I say, even the new fan, can come to the game and have a better sense of what they're watching. And I think fall in love with the sport in a much purer way. And like, there's a lot we can say about the NBA and about the directions Adam Silver is driving the league and that the game is headed. That certainly doesn't fuel a more pure love of basketball. But I do think that kind of conversation is a worthwhile one in terms of, well, what way are people engaging with the league, or what are they hearing from the people who are putting our product out there front and center? Because it's not even necessarily the reactionary kind of wave of media, as in the people who are on the secondary kind of focus of it. Like, say, we are. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about things after the fact. You're always going to get into a lot more narrative. This is what we do. Welcome to the Win and Six podcast. I hope you're enjoying yourself. But I think what we're seeing with the Bucks, I think coaches, the way coaches fit into that equation is team isn't winning. You've got like two or three options now, like to the average fan. And this is not like being like, fans are dumb. I just think this is fully how the way that people process the game has changed. It's like, you need to make a big trade. You need to fire the coach. That's it. That's it in
Yep.
season.
Yep.
The draft
It's
isn't there. Free
well,
agency isn't there. Got to make a big trade or you got to fire the coach. And the funny thing here is the Bucks made their big trade before the season, because in all of this, I kind of think, let's say the Bucks started the season with the team that, they finished largely, or with Drew Holiday and not Damian Lillard. People are going to be talking about trading Drew or Chris. I don't think it's going to be about Adrian Griffin. It's going to be like, look, he's inherited tools that we all know are kind of right at the tail end of it. We saw even some of this with Brook Lopez. I mean, people tried to do a little bit of it, but it
yes.
goes away very, very quickly. I do think if Dame hadn't been acquired just before the season, the button everyone would be pressing would be to trade, trade. This team is broken. They need a trade. Can't be the coach's fault. But I think because the trade was made, it's left a lot of people in that spot. And the Fire Kid thing into the Fire Bud thing into the Fire
By
Griffin thing
Griff.
is literally just an extension of like weird internet culture, and it's crossover and encroachment into sports talk and into
Mm.
like online discourse, into the likes of Twitter, the likes of Reddit, in these kind of spaces. Like Fire Kid, as much as that was the time more than any other, it has to be said, where that whole idea, it had been
Was
earned. Like,
justified.
it was
Yeah.
justified. We'd seen a lot. We'd seen the good. We'd seen it really fall off. And we were dealing with like two into then a third season of a body of evidence to make those kind of calls about. We knew the ins and outs of what a Jason Kidd basketball team looked like on the court. We knew the ins and outs of, what Jason Kidd's brain was going to be like and what was going to come out of it when he was going to talk in any other setting. But it wasn't mean. And that's why it caught fire. No pun intended. But it's the reason why there was an Avatar that everyone adapted. It's the reason why it became a big cause. And that kind of birthed something that I think is very, very hard to kill. And I think within Bucks fans has never gone away. Like, I think the thing with Bud, the time had come. Look, everyone who listens, if you're a long time listener, you probably know I'm as big a Bud fan as anyone. And I would have been one of the people who I would come as close to defending him as possible. But there were things by the end that were basically indefensible. And I think part of that is just there had been a lot of years. Once again, it's like this might just have run its course. And regardless of even if he could fix this, like, could Bud have done some really great stuff with Damian Lillard? I really do think he could. I think it could have solved a lot of problems that Bud was having offensively. But at the same time, the problems weren't just kind of rooted to that anymore because so long had passed. Trust may have been corroded away. Relationships had gone through too many ups and downs. It was best for a change. That's what the organization decided. And I think that's a reasonable thing to come to at that point. Sad as it was, championship coach. But the Fire Bud thing was like from his first season, from the end of his first season, where he achieves the greatest regular season that any Bucks fan had seen in a long time. Didn't like flame out like a laughing stock in the playoffs, particularly compared to what we were used to at that point. And yet, that kind of wave stuff picked up straight away. And we know, look, the intensity of the pressure on the Bucks because of Giannis and Giannis' situation has always been a factor in this. But the idea that, we were all right on Bud. We were all right. We were saying it for years and we were all proven right. It's like, yeah, the guy won a championship at that time, though. It's like, if you were calling for Bud to be fired after year one, you were categorically wrong. Like, there's no world where you can claim that as a victory. If you're claiming for Bud to be fired in the years since the championship, I'll hear your case. I'll say, you know what? That was it. They didn't manage to get back to those heights. But there's this sense of, we've done it before, we've seen this, and it's like Bucks fans just move through this process of it feels stupid saying it like that, even because we're 11 games into a new coach's tenure. There's no process here. We shouldn't be having this conversation. But again, not just to make it all about the negative side of the argument. I kind of find it equally nuts that people are digging their heels in and trying to be really positive about all of this too. Like, it's not all positive. There are a lot of problems. There are a lot of concerns. There are red flags. Doesn't mean that those things all can't be resolved. But I think you look a little bit silly if you're really kind of digging your heels in on this is the guy and he is great and look at what you're seeing. It's like neither thing is true, neither thing is there. You just cannot make any kind of true, meaningful judgment on this yet.
Yeah. I think ultimately about it, and this kind of validates where we talked about whether it was the season preview pod or probably even after the Dame trade of just like, okay, they got the big kahuna, they changed their fortunes, this is a foundation shaking trade. You know what happens with that is fixing it up and doing things in a different way. We didn't go into this year thinking that this is going to be instant success. It's a very workable combo between Giannis and Dame, but there's a lot of other things to figure out of like cascading on down. And that's where I'm giving Griffin a pass, because if we had done this podcast after the Magic game last week, I would have been like, this is not a good feeling. Losing to a frisky Orlando Magic team again, or more than I thought that they would be at this point. But like, I just think it's losing sight of what this Bucks, where this Bucks team stands. And again, using those yardsticks of like, well, this is how it was after they traded for Drew. They had things to work on. This is how it was after they got Bud. And look at the team at that point. They certainly weren't as talented as what the Bucks went on to become. And it's like, but each team is its own thing. It's not just about we look at these flashpoint moments of, okay, you get Damian Lillard. How does that stack up against the Bucks of this year, of the Bucks of that year? It's a very specific case of trading for a guy who is still very good, but certainly on the older side of it, has a lot of injuries that certainly wear on the older side of a player. And you look at the players around him. Again, Chris is 9th on total minutes played this year. He's still working his way back up. It's probably going to be a while until we see a full minutes workload for him. Malik Beasley can really shoot the hell out of the ball. He is not necessarily the guy that you think of as a complementary backcourt partner with Damian Lillard. He's a guy that I would have said I probably won't be judged about this because he just dropped a 30 piece against the Raptors and shot like crazy, but I would say he's miscast as a starting 2 guard. He's a guy that could get hot in a hurry, and you would think in any other situation, hey, maybe let's bring him off the bench. And he kind of gives them someone to buoy the bench units when, Giannis and or Dame and or Chris are sitting, and it kind of keeps the offense moving in some direction. Jay Crowder just got hurt. Brook Lopez is dealing with a very significant defensive adjustment, and they've gone back to drop defense. And hey, it's really working having him at the rim. But therefore, given what is in front of him and the lack of perimeter defense that you lose when you lose Drew Holiday, one of the most malleable players in the NBA, it's a lot for Brook Lopez to handle. Yeah, he can have 7 blocks in one game, but he's probably seen 40 drives a night. So, like, there's just a lot of things to figure out. I understand why people would be concerned, especially, this label of Adrian Griffin being a defensive-minded coach, and you see the Bucks are, I believe, they're certainly in the bottom third of defensive rating, 24th in defensive rating. They have a negative net rating, but that clutch time rating is really good. But I just think things are just in a big work in progress all over the board. It does not help that it helps and hurts that he is a first-time head coach, because there's nothing of data or years of saying, well, this is how it is. These are how Adrian Griffin coach teams are. This is what we can look forward to. It does not help that he's also a first-year head coach who has never been through this before. He has been in the NBA and coaching for a very long time and all this stuff. But, like, I think that is part of why, and I wrote this after the Dame trade, is that this is John Horst's biggest gamble ever. And he's a guy that has made big gambles. It's entrusting a first-time head coach at this particular moment where the Bucks are more talented than ever. They have a top 2 or their top 2 players are again Hall of Famers, but they're also at a point where we're looking at a lot of older guys. Guys have a lot of miles under their belt. Giannis and Chris in particular had off-season surgeries, and it requires getting their legs back in some, and how they're being used in particular are very different than as we've seen the season unfold. I just think how we went into this year from the moment that Adrian Griffin got hired, so many things have changed. And we're still in that mode of like instant success. And I understand why people have that mode, because you want to make good on the Giannis years. But I just never thought this is a team that was going to hit the ground running, because of all the things that I mentioned in the last 5 minutes of why the Bucks had to figure things out. And it's okay to be patient about it, even though we want to feel like, you lost to the Magic by 15, you should be fired or whatever.
I'm not sure there is a benefit to being a first time head coach at this point. There's a benefit when you hire him because you can sell all the positive unknowns of that. But right now, when it's like you haven't hit the ground running, I think it's all negatives. Because I'll give an example to that. We don't know Adrian Griffin in terms of like his persona in the media. And so that makes things even trickier too. To give an example for that, um, I know this was something that you got endless amusement out of, the whole Terry Stotts thing, right? The reality about the Terry Stotts thing, though, and it was the case I was trying to make to you at the time, but you were firing off jokes at such a clip
It
that
is honestly,
I honestly don't know if it could ever have landed.
it is one of the funniest things to have happened to the Bucks in a very long time. It is
I
just,
don't think it was funny, and it could prove to be really deeply unfunny because time
oh
could prove
yes,
that to actually have been a signal of something bad. Now, time could also prove it to be nothing. But it's another one of these situations where, people could race to judgment, but you got to weigh up both sides of that at the time. It's like, okay, well, maybe he's not gonna be pushed around. He's shown his authority. Good for you, Griff. You're you're not gonna be anyone's kind of puppet here. You're not gonna be Terry's way to coach the Bucks. And the flip side of that is this is a guy who was handpicked that you spoke about, and he was going to come in and help you through this, and you're a first time head coach. So probably a good idea. And at the first challenge of your authority, it feels like the first meaningful challenge, player, coach, anything, it ended up in a blow up where, the two sides parted ways. That doesn't seem good either. So you can kind of frame that whatever way you want. And then I think you get to like in recent days when Griffin comes out and he gives those quotes about, basic things aren't going great. And we've got things we're trying to work out, and the vibes aren't perfect. And again, like a lot of people have been quick to kind of have fun and joke about that. That might be something to joke about. It also might not, because I don't know Adrian Griffin enough as like a public figure in the way that an NBA head coach is to be able to get a read on his communication. Like my gut immediately when I saw that was like, my God, man, what are you doing? Like all this could be completely true. Keep it to yourself. You don't need to put it out there. You're putting more pressure and scrutiny on yourself, more pressure and scrutiny on your team. You don't need to do this. Maybe he's just that guy, though. Maybe he's that open, and through good times and bad times, that's the thing that's going to kind of win it over for everyone. Everyone's going to be like, there's no BS with this guy. He's going to come out and he's going to say what's there, and that will give the players faith that they're going to work it out. He sees the problem. He knows it's there. He's acknowledging it. They're going to figure it out. But we don't know yet. Like, we just have no idea because he's a first time head coach. I think that's interesting. And I do increasingly find, again, it feeds into the conversation we just had, but it's also a different thing. I find it interesting. For example, you and I, we were doing this together years. And I think over the years, we have probably been in agreement like 85, 90% of the time.
way
Like
higher.
we've agreed a lot. I mean, it's amazing. We're about to have 400 episodes. Not many podcasts go that long with people actually listening when it's mostly agreement. I think you and I have seen like all these things that you found funny. I haven't found funny, and it's not because I'm just like completely off on the alarmist side of it either, but I'm just like, no, this is like you made the changes. You fired a coach, hired a new coach because these are the stakes. That these kind of little things along the way, it's not, it doesn't feel fun. It's like it's not what you want. This could be how he does things. It could be that Adrian Griffin is a coach that there's going to be some element of drama that is going to follow his team around. But guess what? They're good. They're coaches who work like that. They're characters. That's just who they are.
Old school coaches.
And it could just be that the whole thing is a train wreck and a disaster. And again, I find it so interesting that people are like ready to commit to one way or another. Because in my brain, I can't, like, those two things are right there. How can we possibly choose? I am not an indecisive person in any way. And I'm standing at a fork in the road here, and it's not like, it's like I just have no way. Like, there's nothing. I have nothing to go off of that might lead me to go one way or the other. And yeah, people are digging in, but I find it interesting the reaction it's bringing. I find it interesting that immediately you found the Sots thing funny, and that someone like me doesn't. Do you see that? You just laugh every time I say Stots. But maybe a good way of putting this, and this could be the unknown for you, if we were to take that as just this abstract event, and we're just going to use it as the example. I'm not looking to make this out to be the thing the whole season will hinge on, but we're talking about, so let's use it as the example. At what point in the year, or what would it take for you to be reframing that event to some extent, where it wasn't just instantly funny for you? Or do you think that's possible?
I don't
Would
think
that
that's
be,
possible.
would that, as I began to
it's
ask
it's
it, I was like,
it's
if things
it's
went
the
really bad,
details.
the way that Jordan would cope would also be to make even bigger jokes out of a situation like that.
It's funny. It's ultimately that, it's not spray painting the word ass on Craig Council's field, but it's really funny. Of Terry Stotts walking over to the players tunnel, and Adrian Griffin just wanting him to come back, and that's the last straw. That's funny to me. I cannot help myself, because it just very, there's something in that exchange, the scenes that were set and written, that just tickles me. I don't know why.
See, it's just not to me, because that is probably the most revealing thing we've got so far in terms of like
Oh, 100. I do
interpersonal
agree with that.
dynamics, but we just don't actually know what way to read into it yet. Like, the answer to all of this probably does lie in something like that, or it could maybe be found in him going and talking to the media in the way he has in recent days. And you know what? Since he said that, teams won a couple of games, like, or they've at least won one game since then. I'm trying to think
Two.
of the exact timing. It
I
was
guess those
before.
post
Was it
bowls.
post game or was it pre game? That's what I was trying to work out.
I can't remember.
Regardless, the win against the Raptors was the really good win, right? It was the win where the Raptors certainly played their part in it being a good win for the Bucks, but where there was clear daylight throughout, and the game was pretty well managed in spite of Giannis's absence. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's an entirely new place for us. That's like what I will say. In our time doing this podcast, we've never been in this spot where this early in the season we're having to even consider conversations like this. But it just seems unhealthy. It really just, to me, feels like
You
people don't
don't
watch,
say.
but people don't watch or care about basketball anymore. It's like this is something else. It's not actually about the game of
That's. I
basketball.
think
It's
it's the
just like, to your earlier point,
sensationalized.
it's the everything has to be like a soap opera, and there isn't any inkling. And I'm not trying to dumb it down to this, because this is not how the NBA works, and all of these little things can matter. But there are teams year in and year out who can kind of struggle, and they kind of struggle, and things aren't right, and they just kind of knuckle down in an old school way, and they work it out on the court, and guys figure out
The
things they have to
Heat.
get better at. The Heat do it nearly every year. I didn't want to,
I know, but I'm
I
just
didn't want to
saying,
name them, but they are the example. They do it almost every year.
they just went to the finals as an 8th seed. They beat the Bucks brains out. They so much that they fired their coach. And I just like, I think that is where I'm at, of like, basketball is just a naturally long season, and how teams have operated increasingly over the last decade. Of, you could call it load management, you could call it whatever. Getting back to basketball, as Adam Silver proclaimed a couple of weeks ago, and all this stuff. But like, teams, it has not changed how teams operate this season or during seasons, and just how long of it 82 games is before you get to the playoffs. And that is just another mental, it's not even just physical, it's mental, and just how grinding it is. And it that can make or break whether a coach is going to survive another time or another day with his team or get fired or whatever. I just think like I think that another vexing part of this whole thing of just how just sensationalized it's become of like having a position on Adrian Griffin, Dr. Adrian Griffin, um, this early, considering again of where the Bucks are at this year, is that it just loses context of everything that he's inherited and how much it already has changed. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna go in circles of just saying that whatever people are saying one way or the other, I I don't understand having a feeling this level of conviction that there's something inherently wrong with what he's doing with this team. And perhaps that eventually shows. Like, again, we're judging by this ultimate standard of if you're not winning a championship, you're therefore less than. But that applies to the other 29 teams that do not win an NBA title. I mean, there's only one team that ends winning a championship. And
I think that's fair. And I agree with that. And I'm always quick to bring that up every year, not in a defense of the Bucks. I think it's the reality. I do think when you're at a certain level, though, there's a certain place you have to get to. And I think for the Bucks, anything below a conference finals on a given year is completely unacceptable. Like there just isn't really, bar injury being the cause of it, there's not anything that's gonna be like, well, that's okay. You lost to Team X. It's like the Bucks should be at a level where they're getting to the conference finals and they're in the mix for the team to come out of the Eastern Conference. That's just how it is with the players they have with their roster, how it's been for quite a few years. It's not always going to happen still. Some years are going to be the unacceptable failure. But I do think, like, one thing I wonder with this, so if we take another key moment early on that isn't stats or isn't kind of the recent conversation, it's Brook and it's the defense and it's the commitment to something that honestly the players weren't suited for, that you didn't have the personnel for, and then the very quick adjustment on that because the players came and said, what are we doing here? We need to play towards our strengths. We need to play towards one of our best defensive players' strengths. And it's led to the Bucks going back to drop, looking much, much better. And honestly, like in the course of the season, it could pave the way for them to turn around and us to get to a place which is much more comfortable and make like this kind of conversation, this podcast seem hilarious, at least up until the playoffs, when who knows, maybe drop could be a problem in the playoffs again. But is that something that even, again, you've got this fascinating decision, this fascinating event that becomes impossible to come down definitively on, as much as people might try one way or the other and be like, well, this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. Like, you can't sell it as this is really bad. This guy didn't even have the recognition to know this was the wrong system to run.
Yeah.
Or yes, he doesn't even have conviction. He won't back up his own ideas. He's already changing. Or you can, as I think most people at that point, much earlier in the season, much earlier, I say 11 games into the season, I think most people gave it the benefit of the doubt and actually were quite complimentary of it and feeling, hey, you got it wrong. Player said you've got it wrong. He listened, he adjusted. They're better. I wonder though, in terms of like even subconsciously for fans and for the kind of conversation we're talking about, does that feed into something else because he reverted back to Bud? Well, maybe the most identifiable principle of Bud on both ends of the floor. Like, if we're going to talk about what is the thing from the Bud era that like people
certainly
can hang their hat on,
because how we talked about the offense and the boxes of 5 out and all that stuff, it changed to having the dunker. Like, again, we talk about Bud being this inflexible person. I think that is honestly, I'm thinking about this in real time, so bear with me if I'm not 100% clear with my thoughts here. But I think that is where this is probably the most fascinating thing, and why it was such an interesting hire in the first place, is that Mike Budenholzer is a very, he believes in the system. It's why the irony of uh I think one of the last like true Winning Six episode before last year's playoffs, it was about Eric Name's piece about Mike Budenholzer and the things that he holds true. And it's one of my favorite things that we've done. And I loved hearing about it from Name, and he's one of the best beat writers out there and all that stuff. And it showed stuff that we had not seen from Bud talking about it specifically, because he keeps things close to the vest. This happened in year 5 of this thing, or of explaining things of why he coaches the way he does or did. I hope
he'll be back somewhere. He will 100%.
Yeah. But it's funny to say all these things about how he kept lineup decisions or what they were working on and all that stuff, but it was ultimately, you could see these calling cards. It was about the system and all these different things. And Adrian Griffin at this point, and whether truly reveals itself, we don't know, but there's this chameleon kind of thing of how things evolve. And if you stick to one thing, you're going to be eventually, it's going to get figured out, and teams are going to know how to crack the code and everything like that. And it's ultimately why Mike Budenholzer is no longer the coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. It's some, other things involved in there. But to me, that is a very fascinating kind of reaction to where we are coming out of, and the things that we've already seen in the early time of Adrian Griffin's time as head coach, is that what may be true of one game may not be true of the next game. And I ultimately think, is that a more frustrating watch?
It's what everyone wanted. It's what
everybody wanted.
And it's funny because the comfort level isn't there with it. Like, I think you're right in identifying that. And we can take Bud out of it, and we can talk about Kid. Kid is the same thing. And we go on the defensive end as well. He had a very identifiable style of play, and it was an ultra aggressive defense that we all know what it led to, right? It was the flip side of drop, where drop worked and there were positive results to get from it. I mean, in 2014-15, Kid had some success with his defense, and once that season was over, everyone figured it out, and they traded away personnel that was needed to execute it, and the whole thing just crumbled. We know. We've been over it, we've been past it. But Bucks fans have always kind of railed against rigidity because of Kid. Then Bud comes in, and in his first year, it's a strength until it's not a strength. And then there's a level of benefit of the doubt in year 2, too. And then when that doesn't work out, it's like, okay, this is a problem. And we continue to go on with that cycle. So much so, as you say, in ways where Bud was actually surprisingly kind of flexible and fluid in things he'd do. It never got picked up on. People just wouldn't talk about it because they were so wed to the things that wouldn't change, or the ideas that were kind of core and fundamental. But then with Griffin, maybe part of the problem, or part of why you've got the extremity of reaction on both sides, is he's kind of a preacher without a sermon. Like, he's getting up there and he's gotta wing it.
Sometimes he starts a sentence and he doesn't know how it's going to finish. The Michael Scott gift.
And there are people who are responding to that, are being like, "Yeah, this is what we need. We need a man up there who it's like, it's the reactive part of his brain. Maybe sometimes it's impulse. Maybe sometimes it's going to be his heart leading the way. Like, this is a completely different combination of ingredients, and it's what we want to see from a coach and what we want to see from the Bucks." And you've got other people who I think are also kind of understandably, given what we've been used to, they're like, whoa, we brought this new guy in, and like, what is his vision? And I do think that one change is one that probably weighs on people's mind, even if they're not practically thinking about it, because it's like, well, was that not part of his vision? and he's changed it
Yeah.
right away. And it's like, so why is he the guy now? Like, why wasn't it someone else who would have said, I'm going to come in and do this? So it's like these weird kind of push pull factors where it's the things that have frustrated Bucks fans with former head coaches. They did also always give something to like hang your hat on. In
Yes.
Bud's case, for the ultimate failures, 9 days out of 10, and throughout most of the regular season, it worked. And when
Fucking
you're
won them a title.
and when
I
you're
don't-
confronted with something where it's like, I don't know what this is, and we don't know what it is because it's only 11 games. We don't know what it is because time hasn't told the story yet, but we also don't know what it is because Adrian Griffin has moved away from telling us what it is. He's kind of like, yeah, I guess I got to see what it is. I like that's possibly a factor in this too.
The biggest red herring.
Like, and I get like when I talk through this as like generally a pretty organized person, a man with a plan, I feel so uncomfortable as I talk through the idea of they hired a guy and like I could see the positive in him listening to the players because they shouldn't have gone away from drop. They certainly couldn't have abandoned it entirely. Like these are things we know, but also when it does leave you in a spot where it's like, okay, but what is Griffin's then? And look, what's Griffin's generally isn't working. Doesn't mean it's not going to kind of click together and they'll find a way to make it mesh. But for example, he wants to force turnovers. So Marcus Johnson put out some clips earlier, and we know
Saw
all
that
about the
that
transition
miscue
defensive
live.
problems.
Yeah.
That's central to what Adrian Griffin wants to do here. Like until that kind of clicks, or until it just continues to not click, I don't think we get the answers. And it would be great to have the answers now. I think the one other thing that we haven't really talked about that I do think is kind of essential to this conversation. Anyone who thinks Adrian Griffin isn't the head coach, if we're to hear that argument, like if he's just a wrong guy and he should be gone sooner or later. I do think this idea, why waste any time? Just get him gone after 11 games. That is one of the most drastic decisions, particularly again for where the Bucks are at, who's on the roster, their profile now, that would have been made in recent NBA history. I don't think people realize like the long-lasting stain that would be on John Horst's legacy if he didn't get the next coach right and the Bucks never like bounce back to be the team that everyone feels they should be. We've been told, if not Giannis's pick, very much the Giannis approved pick for head coach. He's just signed a new extension. You're gonna be like, hey Giannis, you're as good at picking head coach as you are at drafting all-star teams. We're firing that guy immediately. Damian Lillard has just arrived here, and you're like, hey Dame, don't worry about that. Basically the nothing to see here gif where it's like, we know you arrived here, you were happy to see a familiar face, and then that guy was gone immediately, and now we fired the head coach who's the reason that guy's gone. But everything's gonna be good. You're gonna get what you wanted here. Like all of that, I think, has to factor into this. There is a level of runway the Bucks would have to give him, no matter how bad it went, because the opposite just doesn't work. Like it could be more damaging to the franchise and to key individuals in the franchise in a long-term sense. I think anyone is weighing up and just being like, don't like how the Bucks look tonight against the Magic, fire the coach. It's like, great job taking the long-term view here of a team that has a few years remaining where you want to win more championships or at least contend for them.
It's just devoid of how things ultimately work. That I don't. Again, we could ultimately come to this conclusion, and we all would say it wasn't the right guy, and for what the Bucks are, and I think that again that is key to all this because that has changed and how it's not just about Adrian Griffin or what came before him. It just things have changed in a very rapid way. That again, it has to be adjusted to that. But yes, that the sensationalized. Well, I've seen all there is to see, and have that
By definition, we haven't. This is like the thing.
exactly. And I don't know. I maybe it's just me, and I'm not necessarily. I don't mean to speak for anybody else, but this is my own personal point of view. It's that I just cannot. If that is my barometer of watching Bucks basketball from now until the end of time, it's like why watch it in the first place, knowing that the ending is going to be bad because the guy that they hired is no longer isn't the right guy. It's just like I don't get it. I really don't get it. And I it's why watching basketball, even if they are still in the state of figuring things out, how this team clicks together and everything like that. It's just I'm more experienced than digging my heels in one way or the other and voicing it in a very unhealthy way, which again, not representative of probably most Bucks fans. It's a very online conversation that we're talking about here, but to kind of sum it all up, it's things that we have seen before, and I'm going to tell you right now, our dear listener, it's things that we will still see again. So we'll probably talk about this, I guess, I don't know, maybe May, depending on if they get that far in the season. We'll probably talk about it again if they struggle.
I
That's
don't.
where
We won't be talking about this in May. I don't like. If we get to May, some stuff has got to have worked itself out, right? Like that's kind of baseline. Obviously, that's not as far as we want to get. But if we get to May, things have taken an uptick, and there'll always be room. I mean, it could just become the Bud thing then again, where it's like he doesn't do it in his first year, and people are really gone at that point. They're like, this guy has
yeah.
to go, and the organization are like, no, he's our guy. And year 2, year 3, like that could be when it pays off. I don't know. I do think it is a very online thing, and I'm aware of that, but I also think this is already loud enough that I don't think it's just online, because I think we're talking about it in the same way that, for example, like sports talk radio will be talking about this, because it is already just like the struggles have been pronounced enough that from the start there has been this element of we got to probe this. And it was the only show in town this season for the Bucks. And like this was a discussion on our crossover preview pod. It's like part of the thing that I liked about getting Dame was I felt Dame would be a welcome distraction from this and would give people something to focus on that wasn't purely every single game. What is Griffin doing and how is he doing it?
Nope. If anything, it's intensified it.
Oh, honestly, I think if Dame could like catch fire and if he could find his feet,
Hit those threes.
well, the Bucks could still probably lose games, so things couldn't work out, and everyone would be like, "Look how good Dame is. Everything's gonna be fine."
That's
Like
how that was my reaction
there are all of
after.
these pieces that are there that like there are things that to be fair are not breaking his way. Now you could say, well, they're not working because of him. I really don't think with Damian Lillard that's the case. I think it's a really difficult case to make that anything the Bucks are doing, like from a coaching perspective, is the reason why Damian Lillard isn't in top gear right now. I just don't. I don't feel like
No,
that's it.
I would not. Yeah, no. To that point, that was my reaction after they lost that Pacers game in a very heartbreaking way. Giannis dropped 54 points. I thought he was going to break the single game scoring record. It was still really to see individual brilliant. I could divorce myself of seeing the result of the game and still being in awe of what Giannis did for 43 minutes because he did peter out. But I still was like, this is great. This is fun. Like I don't know. Like I not everybody is going to agree with me of being in that stage of like trying to find how they overcome the early kinks, but like that's where I just am at. I it'll change over the course of the year, and I would have a stronger feeling on Adrian Griffin one way or the other, but that seems just like a more healthy way to look at things. right? Let things time develop and progress or regress if nothing changes. But it's it is entirely bizarre that we are talking about uh the thought of firing a coach 11 games into a season.
There is a reason that I have really come to love baseball and Brewers baseball in the past couple of seasons. And it's because actually that incredibly long season that is off putting to everyone, what does it do? It absolutely eliminates the stakes of individual games to
There's
mean
always
nothing.
tomorrow.
There's always tomorrow. And what that leaves you to do, and it's something that just generally to all sports, I've tried to tailor my sports viewing experience in other sports to try and recreate that, which is when you sit down to watch a game, you're just watching a game. And the amount of games that really do, like, because when you start to think about what's a meaningful sample size, that have to stack up before you be like, God, I'm really kind of worried about thing X over here. Now I'm saying this, of course, Brewers have a new manager, probably, we'll go through the same cycle we're going through at the Bucks right
Raider.
now. Well, not Pat Murphy, just to be clear
No.
on that, just to clarify. In some ways, Craig Counsell might feel like it, but who's he to speak?
He left his dad to manage the Brewers, his baseball dad.
I don't mean to get a sidetracked, but my point here is, and this is something that I've like my view to the Bucks this year, and I was chatting with a friend at a pod in the last couple of days, and I was making a confession, which, as someone who does a Bucks podcast, as someone who wants people to listen to our Bucks podcasts, probably shouldn't be saying, but it's like I'm not engaging with a ton of Bucks stuff. I'm being really selective at like what my Bucks media intake is going to be. I know what's good for me, right? I know what writers, or if I want to dip my toe in a podcast, of course I'll be listening to the Euro step. But I know where and how far I want to go. And I'm really not I'm not interacting with the Twitter stuff, which probably sounds crazy to people who've just heard us do this whole episode. It'll kind of landed on our doorstep somewhat this week. We won't go any further than that. If it wasn't for that, I really don't think I'd be engaging with it in the way that we are, because I'm just trying to just be like, all this is crazy. Like, all these people, you're all out of your mind. Like, just watch the games and try and get some enjoyment out of this, because this is the time of the season where the stakes actually are low. I know we're making it out that the stakes are super high. They're not. They really
They're
aren't.
not.
And you could just like watch basketball, and it could be fun. You can watch it in that pure way. And Adam Silver can get people who talk about the game and actually just break down the game. I want to start by looking at the Bally Sports Wisconsin broadcasts, this week, because I feel like we've got a standing commentator. It could be upgraded, Jordan. Conversation for another day.
John Horse would trade him. We know that much.
We do. But I just think there's time to allow ourselves to like take a big breath and just see what's coming, and like to live in the ups and the downs of early in the season, and like enjoy it. But I'm not saying to enjoy it as in, I'm not saying to champion it as if it's the greatest thing ever, and that it's like, just enjoy it for what it is. And
Yes.
some nights you'd be like, that was fun, Bucks are good tonight, and other nights you're like, wasn't so fun, the Bucks are bad tonight. It's what happens in an 82 game season. We know they have to build towards something down the line. I am not making the case that they can just flip a switch at that point and it's like nothing is going to
No.
matter. There is a level they will have to reach in the regular season. You can't close the book on that after 11 games. I honestly, you need 40 to 50 games. And I understand, again, the discomfort everyone would have with that kind of thing is, God, well, if they were to make a change that far into a season, it's so late. What could a new coach do? I get it. Like, if Adrian Griffin doesn't work out, could this be a lost season? Yeah, it probably would be, because you got your head coach hire wrong. but they hired him, and you're in it now. And this is largely what I think the season will be. Like, not saying what we see early on, results wise, and I don't have any idea what the season will be. I cannot see the future, Jordan. We probably wouldn't be allowed to do sleeper reads if I could see the future.
I think, yeah, I
But
think that's, yeah.
there's just there's no way of knowing what way this is going to go. I think what we do know is Griffin is the Bucks guy, and it will take a lot to move them off of that, because reputationally it would be a big deal just for like what the franchise has come to represent and what they've worked hard to be thought of. That could all go away if you blow this and you'd struggle to get it right in the follow up. And it's not like there's an easy solution either. And this is always the thing with any coach. It was the thing with Bud. So we'll see. Like, I want to say there because it feels like a nice way to finish the pod. It'll probably all be fine. I don't know though. It mightn't be. But we'll only find out by watching. And in the meantime, you know, so I only worry about what you can't control, Jordan. That's what I try to live my life by. And the reality is we can't control any of this, but what we certainly can't control is, what will the Bucks look like down the road when we've only seen so few games.
Adrian Griffin puts his pants on one leg at a time. And so do you.
We don't know enough about him yet, Jordan, to know that for sure.
That is true. He might have a robot.
Could be, was it the Jetsons? I feel like in the
Jetsons, for sure.
It was like in the intro, right? Like George Jetson like drops from a height. What percentage of our audience do you think I've like completely lost to the Jetsons reference? Obviously, Rohan is gone. He's got no idea.
Yeah, we lost Rohan. Ty is a borderline already.
Ty will know what the Jetsons are.
He probably knows them, but they certainly don't have cultural cachet like the Flintstones. They don't have. There's not like a. What are we talking about right now?
We're talking about the Jetsons. That's clear.
That's true.
Is there anything else you want to touch on? I mean, I think maybe next week. I'd hope.
I'm just glad we're talking about things that no one else is talking about.
Tell me, are people talking about it like we're talking about it? I hear a lot of blood. I certainly, right? I don't hear the let's kind of take a measured approach to this, which I hope is what we've done here. I think it's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Which, yeah, we'll see. But
maybe next week we could just talk about the games and the players.
I would enjoy that. I would enjoy that a lot. I enjoyed this for what it is, but I just like talking about Bucks basketball games ultimately.
On our next episode, we'll get to talk about our Bucks tournament game. The NBA Cup, as it's been accepted, right? Everyone has just jumped on board with the NBA Cup. That's what we're calling it.
IST.
Okay, I get it now. Don't feel like it's as catchy as the NBA Cup, but I think next week we can also talk about Andre Jackson Jr., who,
oh my god,
I
love his aesthetic,
utterly beside
everything about him.
He's
40. He's a number 44. He has an afro, wears a headband under the afro, so it like kind of makes it a little more poofier. Is all over the court all at once. We'll save it for next week.
Listen,
we'll save it for next week.
We've done like an hour and 20 or something this week on this. Next week it's just an hour and 20 on Ajax. How about that?
Oh, actually, yeah, I have a way to frame this discussion.
Oh, well, listen, you holster it there. We'll get back to that. We'll work it all out. All right, that does it for this episode. As always, make sure you subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. That's yours, that podcast network for all things Milwaukee Bucks. You'll hear from myself and Jordan here on the Win in Six podcast. On the same feed, though, you will also, of course, hear from Tywin and Sharon Caddy on the Eurostep. There's no way you're listening to us without knowing that already, but if somehow you're new here, this is your first time, this is what GSPN is all about. I've seen some other slogans lately, but really, we provide a place for all Wisconsin pro sports teams. Not all of them. I mean, there's some that we don't, but most of them. Bucks on the main feed, Eurostep Podcast Network. If you want to hear Green Bay Packers talk, Jordan Treske has got you covered once again with his good friend Numac. Talk of the Tundra is the place for all things Packers. Episode dropped yesterday as people will be listening to this, right, Jordan? Anything you want to pick out, spotlight from that?
For the Packers?
Yeah.
They suck.
So was that
Jordan
what
Love,
your most recent episode was?
No, well, kind of. They're they're young, inexperienced. Jordan Love has flashes of brilliance and flashes of inconsistency. They're just a work in progress, if progress can be achieved.
Seems generous, work in progress right now.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. You're consistent. Look, you're lying out kind of, how you see the Bucks. We got to give it time, and you're taking the same approach with the Packers. Don't listen to every minute of every episode because I'm sure there are times where that's not the case for Jordan. If you want Milwaukee Brewers talk, you can hear from myself and Andrew Snyder. I'm cruising for a bruising. Most recently, we talked about the Pat Murphy hire, Craig Counsell being a traitor, trades, stadium, conflicting reports on what the Brewers are going to do with the roster this season. All sorts of juicy stuff. You can go check that out. And next week, we'll have further reaction to Pat Murphy's introductory press conference, to the Brewers' non-tender decisions, all your off-season talk covered on Cruising for Bruising. Lastly, by no means least, if you want movies, pop culture, all that kind of stuff, go subscribe to Make Time for This. Again, myself and Andrew Snyder talk through all of that. Next up on that feed, an episode about David Fincher's The Killer. I think that's going to drop on Monday. And the episode after that will be about the films of Albert Brooks, the new Albert Brooks documentary on Max. That's it. That's everything we do. As always, thanks to all of you for listening. Try and watch the games. Try and have some fun. Try and take a deep, deep breath. It'll all be okay, or maybe it won't. We'll only find out in time. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.